And now, the Break It Down Show with Jon and Pete.
This is William Negley, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
Perfect. Yes, joining us today on the show, we have the honor of the founder and president of Sound Off, William Negley. Sound Off is an organization who helps military veterans access mental health services and support, and do so without the bureaucracy that plagues veteran services that we've seen over and over again, and with consistency and sometimes the anonymity necessary for jobs that veterans tend to have, or comfort levels in dealing with what guys need to deal with when they return. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, man, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about the organization, how you started, and what you're up to right now.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I was at the time serving in the CIA. It became very apparent to me that there was a general problem. It was sort of intuitive to those in the community, in the national security community, the military community, that there was a cultural issue with providing access to help. That while huge amounts of money had been spent, guys, and when I say guys, it's men and women, were in a culture that wasn't allowing them or encouraging them to seek help. And even if the leadership within those organizations was encouraging them, there may be a stigma or sort of low-level murmur, hey, you may not want to go do that because it could impact your career, or you don't want the other people in your unit to know, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, I can say as from one spy type guy to another, if you self-report that you've got a mental problem, you've just put your entire career
in jeopardy.
In jeopardy, yeah. Absolutely, and they can legitimately and rightfully take your clearance from you and ask you to leave the military. If you attempt suicide, there's a very good chance you will no longer be in the military. So anything on that thing we're trained to ignore that. That's how we're trained.
It just seemed intuitive to me. There has to be a way to accept that this stigma exists. That doesn't mean that it's okay, but just let's all face the fact that it's there, yet still allow these men and women to seek help. And that is essentially how Sound Off, or the initial concept that has come to be known as Sound Off, came about.
That is a mission that it's coming more and more to light that we sorely need.
Yeah, are we all sick of hearing about vets killing themselves?
Yeah, I saw that last week, and yeah, it's again, of course.
I mean, that
and just as one side note about that, I don't know if you all saw this, but the vet who did that was 78 years old, and the
right.
22 veteran a day suicide number that has subsequently been revised to 20 a day. Some people criticize that number because they say, well, the majority of those people are Vietnam vets or these older men and women. And I say, to hell with that. I don't care if you served in Afghanistan, right, Vietnam, or Korea. We owe you no less or greater a debt of honor than somebody who served in Iraq, Afghanistan, or wherever else.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's, you're a veteran. That's the bar. None of this, you're the wrong kind of veteran, or just hang in there and wait. Other veterans are in front of you in line. No, you've done the work.
Exactly.
Let's help these people out.
Is it time to be encouraged that the number's been revised downward?
20 veteran a day number was from 2014 data. If it had dropped by half, I think that we could say, wow, there's something really significant happening here. But no, I am of the opinion that despite strong effort, a lot of money spent, a lot of work put in by a lot of good-willed people, the system isn't working. I mean, I think as we get into a discussion of what Sound Off is and the community that it really serves, we can talk about some of why that is.
Well, let's do that.
Well, and let me just add in some context to that. So in the past week, there's been a news story about a whistleblower being fired from the VA because there's cars that have disappeared from the fleet and no one's accountable for them. That guy gets fired. I had a friend go to the VA to go get some work done, and they forgot to tell him that they had canceled his appointment. So he went there already knowing and posting to Facebook, I'm about to go to the VA because it's always a circus. And then he ends up not getting the care he receives. In the past month, a guy has killed himself in front of a VA. In the past month, a person who's a quadruple amputee called our helpline, didn't get the help he needed and said, that's cool, I'm done anyhow, and ended it. And in the past 6 months, a guy has lit himself on fire in front of a VA. So you could take the 22 kill, the 20 kill, the whatever number. The veterans are screaming at us, we need help. This is not working.
You know, let me just say, I'm totally on board with you about all of that. But let me just say something that, as I have tried to communicate what we're about over the last 2 years, it's really easy to just crap on the VA. You know, you can spend all day just trashing the VA and it'll make you feel really good, but at the end of the day, you haven't gotten anywhere. So what we're about is, we're not about reforming the VA. We're not about lobbying the VA. We're not, there are organizations that do that. Congress should be holding hearings every single day on it, and they can do that for the next century. In the meantime, we're about what we're about, and that is helping these men and women who aren't ready or are unable to access help.
Yeah, and my greater point is not so much to bash the VA, because those guys are doing a lot of work and they have an impossible problem, and there needs to be work done. My point is more on 22 or 20 kill a day. Is that number right? Yes, there needs to be help.
It's a problem no matter what direction that number's headed. Right. It's not moving significantly.
Right. There's people that need help that aren't getting it. Let's figure out how to get them some help.
So maybe it'd be valuable to sort of talk about our core role and competency. And if you go to sound-off.com and watch the 3-minute video on the homepage, you'll understand what we're doing and what we're about to talk about a lot better, because I've explained this a couple thousand times and it takes a few minutes to get through, but that's why we put that video out there. So yeah, what we are doing is targeting those veterans and service members who are unwilling or unable to access mental health support. So the data says that about half, 47%, of majorly depressed and or PTSD veterans do not seek mental health support. That does not include the number of veterans and service members who are unable to access help despite attempting to do so. The short version is, a huge percentage of veterans are unable to access effective help, whether it be because of the VA bureaucracy or because they're culturally not able to do so. We break down the 4 major reasons that exists into a desire for anonymity. So that combines stigma, concern about professional blowback, I don't want my unit to know. So that's sort of all wrapped up into one thing. Geography, I may not live close enough to mental health support to be able to access it. Bureaucracy, it takes forever to get an initial appointment. And then what we call trust, which is not all veterans are ready to speak to a mental health professional, a doctor. They'd rather speak to, quote unquote, another guy that's been there.
Right.
That's sort of the problem as we define it that we're facing. To just sort of go macro for 1 second, a big problem within the VA and even within the nonprofit space is that we frame support or help from the perspective of the person giving it. You know, we make it convenient for the person, for the doctor. We don't structure that help or provide that help in a way that it's really accessible and best accessible to the person in need of it.
That makes sense. Refocusing how you look at the problem and not making it inconvenient for the provider of the help, but making it more convenient and focused on the person who's going to receive it.
Exactly. And this is a particularly critical issue for veterans and service members because so much of their life is, quote unquote, owned by essentially their employer. So while there may be some regulation that says E1 doesn't have to disclose whether or not he's going to seek mental health support, at a very practical level, that tends to happen because he has to leave, because he has to get permission to leave. All of these things, it's a culture that people find out, and that's the problem. Maybe to jump into what it is that we're actually doing to try and attack this, Sound Off is an IT infrastructure. It's essentially a mobile app that allows veterans and service members the ability to develop anonymous relationships with mental health professionals or other veterans. If you think of it in context of a suicide hotline, a crisis hotline, veteran John, and he can call once and be anonymous. He can't call back a week later and say, "Hi, can I speak to Dr. Matt that I spoke to last week? And by the way, I don't want to tell you who I am." It's just not designed to do that. It's designed for a crisis situation, talking that person off the ledge. So we allow them to talk to that same doctor over and over and over again without ever having to disclose who they are.
And you do this by a system of a PIN number.
Exactly right. So we assign upon veteran or service member, and we allow veterans or service members, while I understand those terms are not interchangeable, we allow veterans, or will allow veterans just as easily as we'll allow active duty service members. So when they register for the service, they sign up. All they have to provide is the state they're in, and that's the only piece of data we collect. So we give them a username. You are now Redfish123, and our entire system and the mental health professional that we connect them with will only know them as Redfish123. Now, what information they disclose to the mental health professional is essentially between those two parties.
So the relationship can grow from the initial stage where there is anonymity and it's just user PIN to, as we go further down the road, we get deeper into the work. That veteran has the opportunity to choose to divulge, maybe even get to a place where there's personal contact and they can do it one-on-one.
Yeah, so from the best way to think about Sound Off, you can think of us as the telephone wire. Sound Off will never know anything about that individual other than what state they're in and the username that we've provided them. What goes on between that mental health professional, and we to be careful, there's some guidance, there are things that just aren't okay to be done on our system, even though we may not know about it. What goes on between that doctor and that mental health professional and that veteran is between them. And yes, to your point, if they ultimately want to transfer into a face-to-face relationship, that is outside of our bound. They have essentially transitioned beyond the Sound Off system, if you will.
And are perfectly within their rights and desires to do that as they
exactly. It's not. Well, I don't think we would discourage it any more than we would encourage it.
That's up to the person who's doing the work. So, Lav, you pointed out you provide the conduit, and you provide a conduit that's currently not there. And if I'm being kind, I'll say that at best, very, very difficult to find.
Let me tell you why something like what we're talking about has never happened. Whether in the private sector, although that's changing a little bit, or in the nonprofit sector. So first of all, the technology to do this has only come around in the last, call it 5, generously 10 years. The technology to do what we're talking about is now very commonplace. That was not the case 10, certainly not any further back than that. If you think about what we're talking about, it is totally impractical for any type of for-profit system because you can't bill, just changing a little bit, but you can't bill for somebody that's anonymous. So I've been asked dozens of times, why isn't Sound Off for-profit? Well, because if in 2017, we provide 100,000 hours of mental health support. The VA, DOD, Blue Cross Blue Shield, whoever it is that I am billing for those hours, which would be necessary if it was a for-profit system, is going to allow me to come and bill them and say, I have 100,000 hours of mental health support that I've provided, and I really, really promise that they were all veterans, right? That's just not going to work.
Right.
So the only place that this is applicable is if the mental health providers are essentially donating their time. Just to give the caveat, this is changing some, and there are some organizations that are trying to do stuff like this for profit. What I would argue, though, is if I have to enter a credit card number in my billing information, I'm not anonymous.
Nope.
That is why there's also a risk aversion that has gone on with this. I've talked to a number of people, including some of our board members, who were trying to achieve something like this, and it gets really sticky really quickly if you have risk-averse lawyers who say, hey, this could put us in jeopardy, I don't know, and they just say, you know what, let's just not do it.
Right. Yeah, what's the bigger problem for you? Determining all of the legal loopholes, 50 plus sets of laws that you have to get through, or is it harder to get veterans to accept the help? Because that's always a big hurdle. We're stubborn.
Well, the stopper right now is neither one of those. The stopper right now is funding, but we can talk about why that's the case. But to your question, we got taken on as a pro bono client by Powerhouse DC law firm. And they were instrumental in the early helping us form Sound Off and really think through the implications, the legal and the regulatory and the ethical implications of Sound Off.
Right.
To your point, yes, much of this is state by state, and Sound Off will have to be rolled out state by state. But it's worth pointing out that the VA crisis line doesn't even exist in all 50 states, as crazy as that is.
Say that slower and one more time.
While it may be accessible, as in you can call the 1-800 number, if you go into the documentation, there are places where I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to get precise in what it is that they're saying, because I also saw this a while back. But the short version is that they haven't gone to all 50 states and gone through the legal hurdles to operate there. The relevance of that is just that, yes, this is a state-by-state rollout, but we're entirely confident that that would be doable. To the question of kind of the overarching question, will this make any difference? Will veterans use this?
Yeah.
All we can do is operate from intuition and data that says this is why these men and women aren't getting help, and address those issues. Then, at the practical level, I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds of veterans about this, and you tend to get wow, this is an amazing result. We had a very high level retired general that we were speaking to about this, and he was saying, this is awesome, all about it. And then he said, I'm not sure I would have used it, but to me,
Right.
That's the entire point,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
That they don't have to be willing to admit to me that they would do anything. But at 2 a.m., when they're saying, I need some help, they've got a way to securely and anonymously access that help.
In any state, ultimately.
Yeah, we've talked about how this would work in war zones. I mean, we have talked about the geography of Sound Off, frankly, is the easiest part, because the limiting geographic factor is how many mental health professionals do you have in a state relative to the veteran needs of that state. And we can connect somebody in El Paso with a mental health professional in Dallas, Texas.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete Turner.
And if you like the show,
Do us a favor.
share it.
That's the biggest thing, honestly.
All your social media outlets, all your friends, let them know the ones that you like.
Yeah. I mean, we make this show for you guys. If you think it's great, say so. Say so by sharing it. Say so by putting a comment in after the show.
Also, if you go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts, give us a rating, give us a review. If you think the show is great, please give us 5 stars and say so. And if you think the show really sucks, please give us 5 stars and say so.
Because, heck, we're listening.
That's right.
You can't be more approachable than us. We want to make the show better. If there's something that we're missing, let us know. That really is how you help us.
That's right. Tell us all about it. Thanks for listening.
And now back to the show.
We make incredibly efficient use of those limited resources, whereas if the model required somebody to walk into a brick and mortar building, as essentially every other for-profit, nonprofit, and government-led organization does, they're limited by how long it takes me to drive. From
Solving
A to B.
a lot of the brick and mortar problem, that places like Amazon and whatnot did, started to do 20 years ago. You're eliminating the requirement of having to take that extra step of, especially if you're someone who's depressed, getting up and out of bed and over to a place can be a big hurdle already. And I guess you're looking at the numbers for what it takes to get veterans to accept help, and you're working on addressing that. What other types of obstacles are out there to that we need to identify and get out into the ether as we are all talking? What else do you need to figure out? What do you guys need help with?
Well, so to take a step back, I mean, the way that we break it down, the obstacles to veterans and service members seeking help are anonymity, geography, trust, and bureaucracy. The anonymity issue, which is more or less the core competency of Sound Off, it's really challenging for any type of brick and mortar institution to address that. And while the VA has addressed some of it via the crisis lines, it's not treatment, right? I mean, and I don't think anybody in the VA would claim that that was treatment. It's, I'm going to talk you off of the proverbial ledge, and hopefully I can transfer you into one of our more traditional resources. But when you have to walk into an office, fill out paperwork, do all of these things, the idea of anonymity just goes.
Just hearing you say that was a detriment to my desire to
even
do it too.
Yeah. You're giving a guy a person with problems. You're giving them
Absolutely.
more problems,
Right.
more hoops to jump through.
The biggest player by a mile in the nonprofit space in veteran mental health support is the Cohen Network. They've just come in. Steve Cohen injected something like $200 million. I mean, just some insane amount of money. And I think they're going to do great work, and I'm not taking anything away from them. But you see the word anonymous used very often, and I think, frankly, it's why people haven't really thought about what that means. While via something like the Cohen Network or these other organizations may not report to the military or need payment or something like that, that doesn't make that person's that person.
I just want to interject for our
anonymous.
listeners, just a quick touch. If you're listening and you haven't already, go to sound-off.com so you can hear what William's talking about, so you can watch the video at the homepage and get a little more information in the form of a summary of what William's talking about. Follow them at Sound Off on Twitter and follow their Facebook page as well. But start off with sound-off.com. Great place to understand the mission and get a little more detail on how you can support veterans getting better access to mental health services, doing so with some anonymity, and doing so with a delivery of quality and consistency. I want to ask now, in the environment that our veterans have more recently been through in Iraq, Afghanistan, places like that, are mental health issues different, more complex than they were for the veterans who came back from Vietnam or World War II? Or what are the differences that exist now in the dynamics of the military as they've changed?
Sure. First of all, I would say up front that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and working on this. I am not a student of the history of this. Rand Corporation and other organizations have done a lot of research on that. But what I would say from my perspective is there's a couple probably distinct things. The biggest differentiator, I would argue, with our current veterans is the size of the military. You know, you have an all-volunteer force that is, I mean, let's call it at its I think there's 20 million veterans in the country. I mean, say over the last 30 years, 20 million people have served. That might even be high. You know, that is a fraction of certainly World War II. That has created this strange dynamic where look at the experience of veterans coming home now versus the at least stereotypical experience of veterans coming home from Vietnam. Certainly, you have a much more supportive, respective homecoming, but it's not an experience that is culturally shared by 50% of the men in this country. You know, I mean, that's just not the experience. When you look at issues like workplace veteran employment, and you have issues with, I don't know how to place a veteran, I don't know. You can look at a lot of different issues associated with that, but a pretty fundamental one is if you have an office of 50 people and one or two serve, that is somewhat of an isolating experience. Certainly, it's a differentiating experience. I would argue, and Pete, I mean, certainly I would welcome your input in this. I would argue that is one of the larger issues. I think that where veterans and service members have benefited is the evolution of the understanding of mental health over the last 70 years. And while certainly we have not gotten to a place in this country where the stigma of seeking mental health support is gone, the fact that we're even talking about trying to do away with it is certainly a benefit.
Contextualized knowledge that you can only get by being deployed somewhere, being in the service, is definitely one of the barriers to linking people together. Most of my service was outside of the military, by the way. I've worked with the military instead of in the military for a lot of my time. But that's because it takes someone who was in the military to do the kind of work that I did. So you've got this very, very cloistered community. Folks don't even know how to talk to veterans, really. I mean, it's nice to hear, thanks for your service, but ultimately there's nothing in that. And it's sort of just become this, it's a greeting. Oh, you're a veteran? Oh, this is where I say, thank you for your service. It's not meant that way when it's said, but that's part of that lack of contextualized knowledge. You know, I know if I talk to a veteran, I can say, hey, where have you been? I have a conversation I can have with them already. But if you've got literally no contact, no one in your family that's ever served, how do you talk this? That's like talking to someone from a foreign planet or a foreign country. You just don't have that level of understanding. And that bleeds into everything that we do to interact with veterans, whether it's hiring them or understanding that, look, we all have some form. Being in your middle age means that you have some form of PTSD. You've been through something that dramatically affects what you do, in your life. Like, we've all been through that. But until you can look at it from that kind of perspective, you don't understand that. It's like, yeah, I have a rough day every now and then. I didn't used to have rough days as often, but I'm almost 50 years old, like there's some scars on all of us. So just understanding those contextualized things, it is part of the problem. When companies talk about hiring veterans, I mean, part of the thing I do professionally is I help them figure out how do they do that, not just hire veterans, but hire veterans well, identify who we actually want, how do we provide the help? There's all kinds of people that have reached out to me on Twitter because of being on Jay Moore's show and said, hey, how do I help? It's like, well, there's a lot of areas to help. Here's where you can get started, just guiding people. And that all that goes to that greater lack of a shared experience of being in the military because it is so compartmentalized now.
And even further to that, World War II, 3, 4, 5 years,
Right.
maybe, and you were home. 15 years on from 9/11, I don't see any end in sight. It's because of good, bad, or otherwise policy decisions by elected officials and the threats that we as a country face, we're going to be in this for a while. When you have a very relatively limited military, that means these men and women are spending a lot of time, large chunks of their lives engaged, if not in direct combat, certainly deployed in dangerous places.
That's exactly it. Deployed in dangerous places. And then while you're deployed in that dangerous place, just as an element of context, the rest of the world is moving on without you. And so, and it's, you come back and you're like, yeah, I've been doing stuff. Why don't you start again? And you get this whole, and you worked in the government and it's like, well, that doesn't apply to this. It doesn't, someone from the CIA who can work with the CIA doesn't have the skills that a company would want.
I'll never forget this must have been 04, 05, Iraq was really dominating the news coverage. And the cover of Time magazine was Afghanistan, the Forgotten War. Here we are 10, 11, 12 years later. I mean, it's maybe not as bad as it ever was. But
what's next for the organization? What are you hoping to accomplish in the next year, next 2 years? As we look down the road, what are the milestones that we're reaching for? And how do we engage more people, sort of suck them into the mission?
Sure. Maybe if we can look back a little bit to contextualize where we are now, that would provide insight looking forward.
Yeah, please.
So I had the idea, the initial sort of flash of genius, as they say, maybe 3 years ago. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I bought the website. I'd sort of been scratching on paper, but I said, okay, if this is going to be a real thing, because it just kind of stuck with me. You have lots of ideas and some of them fade out. But I said, if this is really going to happen, I need to take some time and really devote some time to it because I was still at the agency full time. So I took 6 months of leave without pay. In that 6 months and really the subsequent 6 months, that first real year, it was a very inward facing time. We were developing the model. What is this? Okay, we have this idea that you can talk to somebody and nobody knows about it, but what does that really mean? We did a lot of IT design, a lot of playing lawyer, a lot of talking to lawyers, a lot of talking to mental health professionals, and then there's the nonprofit component of it. We knew early on the only way this is really going to work is as a nonprofit. So I had to go recruit a board, recruit more board members, kind of get this whole package put together. Having done that, at the end of it, we said, okay, if we're going to do this, what's it going to cost? We worked up a budget. We projected forward 5 years. Our budget for the first year is about $750,000. First 3 years, about $3 million. All in. This is a really challenging and not all that uncommon place for a nonprofit to be in. Most nonprofits function on a model of I do as much good as I can. So the example that I always use is I want to give backpacks to inner city kids so that they can go to school. If my model is I buy these backpacks, in the first year, I raised $10,000 to buy these backpacks. Well, I can buy $10,000 worth of backpacks. Not to say that that's easy. The next year, if you raise 50, if you raise 100, whatever it is, you're good to go. The challenge with something like Sound Off, and this is, again, not all that uncommon, is that our first year budget is binary. We're on or off. We can't just do $50,000 worth of Sound Off. It is a capital intensive process that first year to do the IT infrastructure, recruit the mental health professionals, all those sorts of things just take money. We knew, okay, we have to raise about this much money. Long story short, we started engaging with family foundations, some big nonprofit grant writers, and Wounded Warrior Project. We started talking to Wounded Warrior Project about a year ago, and about 8 months ago, they committed to a 3-year runway, which was more than we asked for.
Right from the start. Here, don't ask for one. Let's do all three.
It was awesome. Unfortunately, almost immediately following that, they fell into some well-publicized troubles. As a result of that, they have had to temporarily pause that financial contribution. So they assure us that they remain long-term committed, but just to put it bluntly right now, they're just trying to right the ship. And for the record, General Lennington and the others there, I have every bit of confidence that will happen. What that means for us is that we have essentially rebooted that initial seed money, if you will, fundraising process. And the timing of all of this is that we literally started doing this 3 weeks ago. But through this process of the last year, we have developed a lot of great relationships, gotten our name and brand, if you will, out there to those in this space.
Finding the money to keep the lights on is a big deal. I mean, we work out here in the Silicon Valley area. Fundraising and getting in front of venture capitalists is the lifeblood. I mean, everybody talks about that all the time. How do we get funding? How do we get the next round? How do we? It's a big deal.
It's so funny because I don't mean to say this arrogantly, but if we had equity to give away, I am very confident we would have raised more money than we ever could have wanted. Given the model upon which we're operating and the fact that there's no profit to be made for anyone, it really takes, furthermore, operating in an incredibly crowded space. Veteran nonprofit is arguably the most crowded philanthropic space out there, and furthermore, the most ripe with scams. I mean, just bad actors. It just makes it very difficult to get through the noise. And furthermore, a lot of people are going to assume you're a bad actor. Until you show and convince them otherwise, they're going to assume you are out there.
One is people don't know where to help, and they don't trust that the help that they're going to give to Wounded Warrior or fill in the blank organization is the right kind of help, but they want to associate their name and their conscience with. They just don't know where to go. That's one of the reasons why we're talking to you, because I believe in this anonymity model and getting folks help before they're on the edge of a building. The other thing is all of us veterans carry around this bag of betrayal. I'm always talking about the bag of betrayal. I don't believe in you. You're going to have to prove it to me that it's real. And that's if I'll put in the effort. Like I could go to the VA and deal with them and get care and everything. I don't want the hassle of it. Because they've literally got 2 strikes and I've done with them. I just don't want to go back. I don't need hassle.
Yeah. And let me inject one further thing into this. The mental health space in the nonprofit mental health space for veterans.
Right.
I will admit I don't have hard data on this, but I'm pretty sure this is true. Is ironically the most under-resourced space because it's so challenging to actually do something. It's really, if we look at veteran homelessness as kind of a core issue within the veteran community, it's really easy to spend $1 billion attacking that. I'm going to allocate $25,000 to a home, and I want 40,000 homes built in a year. Like, you are putting a solid dent and know exactly what the problem is and more or less how to address it. But there are major grant writers who don't really deal in the mental health space because they don't know how to do it. And even if you just look at this tangentially, and this, just for the record, isn't a criticism of any of these people doing this, but you see a lot more, I did a triathlon, I am doing 22 push-ups a day, I'm having a marathon. These things that bring awareness to the issue, which is massively critical, but fundamentally aren't attacking the underlying problems that are plaguing the veteran and service member community, because it's really complicated and really hard to do.
A big, furry, hairy problem, but it's one that someone has to roll their sleeves up on and get to work dealing with. Hey,
and when you're Steve Cohen and got $200 million, and you can essentially build your own VA, I mean, to speak hyperbolically, okay, like, go for it. But I would contend Sound Off as a model is the first really innovative model or idea.
I want to give you the chance to put out all of your Twitter stuff and your Facebook stuff here as we get to the finish.
Yeah, we are at Sound Off, and our Facebook is the same thing. So we are Sound Off.
Sound Off Inc. on
Sound
Facebook,
Off Inc.
and then are you Sound Off Inc. on Twitter or no?
Yes. No, we are at
and
Sound Off on Twitter.
Sound-off.com.
Yes, sound.
People should absolutely go there.
Exactly right.
Any final thoughts for us at all, William?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about what we're doing. Really critical and tragically stagnant problem. I commend everyone that is in this space and doing good work to try and help these men and women. It's just a really challenging issue, and we have our little piece of the pie that we believe can impact a certain portion and complement the efforts of those other organizations. But yeah, it's going to take hard work, and it's really going to take, I think, a cultural and national
we agree, and we
effort.
also applaud the organizations out there doing good work, and that means you. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, please keep up the good work, and we will absolutely keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
And see how you're doing, and we hope you'll let us check in let our audience know about your progress, and hopefully we can help you and work together.